Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Respecting the Beer. My name is Gary Arndt, and I got the usual suspects with me again. We have brewer extraordinaire Bobby Fleshman, who is petitioning NASA right now that if Planet 9 is discovered, he just wants to name it Planet Beer. Good luck with that.
All right.
Take a break from the Greek and the Roman gods and all that stuff.
All right.
And just
reset that, derail it. I'm into it.
Now, on a similar note, we got Joel Hermansen here, who just got back from a trip to Seattle, where he petitioned the Boeing Corporation to name their next plane the Boeing 547.
That's good.
Jury's still out on that. And also, we got the good professor with us, Alison McCoy Fleshman, whose current project, from what I read, is she's trying to develop cold fusion in an English ale.
I almost nodded a little on that one.
And then based on what I know, you should always go public with your findings before you publish it.
That's fair.
That always works well.
That is fair. Cold fusion. Taste the difference.
So in this episode, we begin at the end of Prohibition. Beer, alcohol is now legal. The long national nightmare is over. And Joel, we didn't just pick up where things left off at the start of Prohibition.
No. And in fact, if we could, just to refresh.
And we're in the Prohibition room right now. We're being stared at by all these people, these pictures.
I love being up here talking about Prohibition. This past Saturday, we had some fabulous people from Milwaukee, and including my doppelganger, Mike. And we were going through some of the things here in the room, and there's just such a terrific collection up here. It's so easy to talk about this in this room.
Just out of curiosity, you've never mentioned it. Where did you get all these pictures from?
So when we were building the whatever it's called, the Prohibition room, Joel David's like pointing to you, not even noticing.
Sorry.
Anyway, so we're building the Prohibition room, and so we went into business with Bobby's parents. And his father-in-law was like, it'd be really cool to have some, pictures of some pretty ladies on the wall. And I'm quite a feminist, and I was like, okay, cool. So I got some pretty ladies on the wall. There's some beautiful 1920s advertisements, I guess, of women in beer, and you can't see their ankles. They're covered up completely. It's lovely. But then I got to thinking this is the Prohibition room, and so I found all of these Associated Press photographs that are copyright free because they're 100 years old on the women behind repeal. And so, if there was information with the photograph, I cut out a little bit of that information. So I'm looking over David's shoulder. There's one where the woman is holding the last bottle of beer pre-Prohibition, and it's selling for like $10,000. But then there's also some women that were really key in getting the logistics to get legislation passed to get repeal to happen. And so,
Old frothing slosh.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever seen it. This was a 1970s beer.
Oh, my God.
And this was their can.
I love her.
Is that a steel can?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I used to collect beer cans in the 70s, and we would go down to, what's the name of it? It's right over here. Flanagan's.
Oh, yeah.
And my dad, because I always wanted the can, so he'd have to drink it. And he got like a bunch of cans of Old Frothing Slosh.
I love this.
Wow.
Gary, I don't know if this is an appropriate time to mention this, but we also happen to have history classes in the Prohibition room.
Yeah.
Which is super exciting.
That's true.
And science.
Science classes.
And it's also entertaining for people that take both Joel's and Allison's classes.
If people want to compare, that's just what they're going to do.
Right, yeah. I mean,
there's
there's been a number of people who have stated who they think is funnier. A number of people.
I got voted off the island.
You did.
Like in
you
the
were
first
awful.
term.
I think if you have the humanities and the sciences represented, you maybe should get someone to do interpretive dance.
Ooh.
Like in The Big Lebowski? Would you be willing to do that? No.
Anyways, Prohibition.
So, yeah, I think it's probably best to remind our audience of the fact that after 1850, there is this moment in American history where German lagers explode onto the scene out of, large, substantial breweries like Pabst and Anheuser-Busch. Pabst was the larger of the two at the time. And between really the end of the Civil War and the Progressive Age, beer was exploding in the United States. There were more than 4,000 breweries. They were producing enormous tax revenue. They had tied houses, which were small local neighborhood bars that would, we've all driven down, for example, Mason Street. There's still a couple bars here in Appleton that have the old signs, Schlitz or Pabst or whatever. Those are kind of a reference point to the old tied house.
And connecting with a couple weeks ago when we talked with Lee from the beer blog in Oshkosh, I think the Oshkosh Beer Company was doing their own. They decided not to expand too far, but to put a million little tied houses out in their own community.
Yep.
Yeah, it was the strategy of a lot of breweries at the time.
And gradually, what started to happen through industrialization, through the Gilded Age, is that as a lot of people were fraternizing these tied houses and spending, significant amounts of their income, oftentimes on the day that they got it, and by the time they bring the income home back to the family, in many cases, often, which is still sometimes happening, the women were the voices of reason at the house, and they started to openly wonder about where much of the income was going, and they began to lash out at tied houses and things like that. And you start to get the temperance movement, which ultimately produces the Volstead Act, or as we call it, Prohibition. But when Prohibition was repealed, and there's been quite a bit of recent scholarship on this, which is why we're kind of circling back to it. There's been a really good new book that's come out by Jason Taylor called The Brew Deal, How Beer Helped Battle the Great Depression. And I think it was just a focus in one of the major brewing magazines. I'm not sure if it's Zimmergy or
the New Brewer. The New Brewer is the Zimmergy for the breweries themselves.
I think that was what it was. But his work is super exciting, and it's kind of showing us a little bit about not necessarily what happened in the middle of Prohibition. I mean, because certainly breweries had to find a way to do different things. Some of them were making ice cream, and some of them were making non-alcoholic malt beverages, and some of them were even making yogurt and cheese, and Pabst was making a cheese spread, and all of those things were happening. But it's really what happens after Prohibition, or as you like to describe earlier,
Long National Nightmare?
The aftermash and the post-after. What were you talking about?
Aftermash before aftermash?
Yeah.
The Family Guy reference? Yeah.
Right, that.
So after Prohibition, the number of breweries in the country
plummeted.
I saw numbers like it went from thousands to a couple hundred.
Yeah. And we got to think of this in terms of per capita. We can't just be thinking in terms of absolute number of breweries.
Right.
Because that was a huge number. Like it would equate to something like 20 or 30,000 breweries today.
Yeah.
In those terms.
One of the reasons I can't help but think Wisconsin, like Milwaukee was known as the beer city for so long, is that when we talked about this on the previous episode, Prohibition was not strictly enforced in Wisconsin. For the most part.
No.
It was loosely enforced. And you look at the breweries that come out of Prohibition, you got Schlitz, Pabst, Anheuser-Busch, which comes from St. Louis, all very German cities where you had a beer drinking culture. In Wisconsin, they were able to produce near beer. So they were at least making something to keep the lines moving. So they were in a very good position coming out of this, whereas something in, say, New England probably got hammered, because they didn't have that level of tolerance like they did here.
Yeah.
Very influenced by the German, in Wisconsin, the German immigrants. And this building is home to a brewing company that opened officially in 1933, which is the year that Prohibition ended. But throughout that, we were doing the renovations on this, and we seem to have found evidence from 1929 that there was beer happening this was a dairy company until it became a brewery officially in 1933.
Well, we found all those receipts from was it Schlitz or who was it?
Schlitz and Blatz, but it was Calumet
Blatz.
Brewing Company before it was those distributors.
That's right. We found the letterhead.
Yeah. So there was a lot going on here, and I think that as long as people were paying taxes, and I've mentioned this several times, then it seemed to have gone unnoticed by the state of Wisconsin.
The other thing, so we're sitting in the Prohibition room, but there's an attic above us, which I've never been in.
It's right through there.
But you
We're
could
sitting 5 feet, 10
see
feet
the
from
door.
from the hole in the ceiling.
Gary has decided we're going to make another stairwell up into there.
to that hole.
And
We found 300 crates of this is getting off into the dairy history, but yeah, we found 300 crates that they delivered milk bottles from.
They're still up there?
No, we took them down.
No, they were,
And she made me get rid of most of them. There's
because
still
they were
many
falling apart and they were
yeah,
burned.
I'm kind of a pack rat.
But but the fire that happened there on the building next door came over somehow. There was some damage that came over, and I think they just were like, nope, it scorched whatever it's done, and so they just kind of sealed it off. But yeah, that's I think a prohibition also.
But yeah,
storage.
we're living in a building. I mean, we're recording in a building that was part of this whole story too, for sure.
This building, and I had several conversations with people on Saturday about this. This building has a tremendous amount of history, and people.
it's sad that we gutted it completely.
Well,
Oh no, I think you've done a very
discovered it.
respectful
Yeah.
restoration of it.
yeah, when you look at it, it was a building that was on its way to being leveled before we took it on.
Right.
And that's where we have a steel spine that holds it together now and all these things. But yeah, I think we've done well with it.
The ceiling's
Yeah.
original up here.
Yeah.
Our banker actually helped us paint that.
The best compliments are when people argue with you on the age of it when they walk into the tap room.
That's the other earlier on our Q&A podcast. One of the questions was what's something that goes unnoticed that you wish people would notice. I think it's
it's not
it's all
old.
new
Yeah.
except for the back bar, but that's not original.
Right.
Like
you have to anchor the tap room with something.
The only place you can tell the age of the building is the brickwork up here, I think, where you can
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
it's not covered up.
Yeah, for sure. And on the front facade and on the side. But yeah, I get you.
And then we have a beautiful set of stairs coming up here. Can you go into the origin story of the stairs to get up here?
Well, we've taken a
this is
long route
when
here.
Gary scolded us and he was like, "You should have a
This
staircase
is all
there."
Patreon stuff. Let's go. All right. So not only are breweries decimated,
Oh right, prohibition.
but
Yes, back to this.
you basically have a generation of people who either didn't drink
Yep.
or they were going to speakeasies where it was more cost effective to drink spirits than it was beer, because it's easier, you pack a lot of alcohol in one keg than you could, say, beer.
Sure.
So it was more efficient for smuggling and everything else. So what happens then once this, prohibition's lifted?
Well, I think we need to back up just 1 year. I think you need to really look at the election of 1932. Like, Roosevelt campaigned hard to lift prohibition, and it was for revenue reasons. I mean, the federal government was being starved of an enormous amount of revenue. And, Herbert Hoover and FDR were complete, polar opposites when it came to their perspective about what the government needed to do for people during the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover was all about, that it should have been privatized, it should have been charitable organizations, and FDR, had the workings of the alphabet soup programs, with the AAA and the CCC and the WPA and so on and so forth. He had all of these ideas. Well, one of the ways you're going to fund that is by lifting this enormous, I would call it an anchor on tax burden. And all of the historical studies that have been put into place right after the elimination of the Volstead Act, even when they went to the kind of intermittent point, which is the Cullen-Harrison Act, which allowed for the sale of 3.2% beer. And Bobby, no, you're not off the hook because you're going to talk about this in a second. But this was an enormous boon in tax revenue because they initially decided that they would ease back into this and they would produce something called near beer, which is a 3.2% product that was viewed as non-intoxicating. So basically, this was kind of this middle ground.
The invention of the lawnmower beer.
Right. This was like this middle ground to satisfy the angry temperance, and yet also to fulfill the Democratic Party's vision in 1932 of using brewing as a mechanism to raise revenue. So they come up with 3.2% beer.
I don't know where that number came from.
No, that number is completely arbitrary. I think they asked a number of medical and scientific personnel what would be a non-intoxicating level of beer that they could still have alcohol revenue attached to, so that they could still fund the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, et cetera, et cetera.
And this hits.
And they come up with 3.2, which I'm thinking is a really hard beer to make.
It's hard to make a beer like that with flavor and body and to make it interesting. Never mind the alcohol. It's just we do it. I mean, we make some of those beers in that category.
But
it is challenging.
And NA is
0.5
or less.
Yeah.
And those are hard to make.
Yeah, that's all. It's a whole different conversation. Yeah.
And now you only have 2.7% to try to add mouthfeel.
Yeah.
And taste and
Right.
aroma.
And
this must be daunting.
Not to get in the science of brewing or of fermentation, but there's a lot that goes on there besides alcohol, and you're losing out on all that. And that's why NAs suffer so much, because there's so much that happens beyond the production of alcohol that you're missing out on that gives the beer its soul. But as far as that hits home for me and Allison, the 3.2. Mm-hmm. That was our entire life in Oklahoma. I mean, that didn't change until after we moved here.
My condolences.
Yeah, I know. So you could buy 3.2 beer cold. You can buy anything else not cold, but everything that was cold was 3.2.
Yeah, and
because I guess what's the logic there?
Dumb.
Yeah.
None. What?
Not only is the beer
The
suffering,
logic is what?
Yeah, there's no logic. Right.
So the beer is suffering on the shelf.
But no, my mother lived in Houston, and she would come up to visit, and she would do beer runs for us. She would bring New Belgian Fat Tire. She'd load up the car and bring it up to us because it was so sad.
These are blue laws that...
Do you remember when our friend from grad school would bring down this beer called Spotted Cow?
Spotted Cow, and I would ask for their cherry sour.
Oh my God.
Which it was
so rare.
I will give props where it's due. That's one of the best beers in the entire United States. The
Serendipity?
No, it's not Serendipity. That's the apple. Are you talking about
the Belgian Red?
Yeah, the Belgian Red.
Oh, the one. Yeah, that is phenomenal.
It's one of the best in the entire United States. Give it where it's due. They do things that are anyway. So that's a commodity down south. You can buy anything with that in the beer world down south.
Yeah, we had a mule for a while from Milwaukee. It was great.
Do you think their strategy of not selling Spotted Cow out of Wisconsin has, it's obviously produced a mystique.
Yeah.
But do you think that that's a lucrative approach?
I do, especially in this market, because I think most breweries have realized you cannot overextend. And I think by saying that, I'm going to put air quotes here, that I'm only going to take over one state is not the worst strategy. Yeah, I don't think...
Particularly this state, where we drink a lot of freaking beer.
It's a pretty good marketing.
It's basically what Coors did in the 70s.
Yeah.
They were more than a state, but you could not get it in some places, which meant that people in those places wanted it.
I met a guy at a Dead show in 2018 who knew I was from Wisconsin. It was a show out of the state, and we kept in touch, and he was begging me to bring him a case of Spotted Cow.
Yeah.
Like it was like I was bringing the Ark of the Covenant. And
it's great. It's great lines. Liquid, but the marketing is just level 11. It's ridiculous.
Well, I think the name also.
That's what I meant.
Evokes Wisconsin.
That's what I meant by that. Yeah. That really resonates.
Prohibition.
Right. 3.2 Cullen Harrison Act, raise revenue to produce a mechanism of steady revenue so that you can implement what was eventually the first New Deal. Now, if you recall from your history classes, and if you can't, this is one.
It's a Wayne's World moment. Where
Right.
like do the flashback.
Right.
Thing. Yeah.
So there were two New Deals. There was one in 1933, which was that first 100 days period where they stabilized the banking system and they, put forward the 3 R's, relief, recovery, reform. And then the second one was in 1937, which was to try to fill in some of the gaps, of that program. And the greatest legacy of the second New Deal is Social Security. And in order to fund, and we're not going to go through an alphabetical listing of, maybe we'll do that on Patreon.
No,
To have an
don't do that.
alphabetical listing.
What an
of-
advertisement.
Right.
Yeah, no.
Wow.
If you sign up for Patreon, you won't have to listen to the list.
Joel will also read the phone book.
Wow.
Wait, what's a phone book?
Wow. But yeah, I mean, so this was really instituted to pay for a lot of these programs. But one of the stories that is not told about this time period is, so you go from 1919 to 1933, you're either producing illegal beer, you're producing near beer, you're producing, non-alcoholic malt beverages, you're producing yogurt, ice cream, or cheese out of these, the technology of the time. So all of a sudden, you can't just be expected to flip a switch and all of a sudden we're a brewery again. There was a lot of, 15, let's
I would say unless you're
round it
privy.
up. That's 15 years of not brewing.
What if you're privy, though, to the timeline ahead? There may have been big breweries that were understanding where they're going, so they may have hypothetically
Not been brewing.
But that
Okay.
would have been a
brewing.
violation
Well-
of the Volstead Act because it said manufacture and sale of.
I'm
But
just saying.
you can't see
yeah,
inside these tanks.
Yeah.
It's yogurt,
It all
I
happens
promise.
kind of out of sight, out of mind.
True.
Yeah.
Although let's be thankful.
I do think it's interesting that as soon as the Prohibition ended, there was a lot of beer. Way more beer than the production of lager should have allowed out in the
Right.
market.
Well, and let's
Yeah.
be thankful as these companies are making. I'm thinking of a small business, and it's just all us on hands on deck. So we don't have an army of people to do a lot of this work. That if we had to all of a sudden switch or shift, well, much like we did in COVID, that there's not back then Google reviews or any other Facebook reviews or that
Let's go
sort of
back to
thing.
those times.
And, there's a kindness. It's like it's so hard to shift gears.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think one of the great challenges is dusting off the gear and you're producing beer again. Like if
Yeah.
you shut down, and just thinking from your perspective,
Man.
if you shut down production for 3 months
Whew.
and
You can't do it. It's a living
all
organism.
all of your supply chains,
Yeah.
all of your employees who are producing, the expertise. You work with some awesome brewers down there.
Yeah. They're
And
the best.
all of a sudden,
Yeah.
if they had gone somewhere else, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden, Cooler's out there making string cheese somewhere, and then
Let's
and then
get Cooler on here. He's going to
Right.
respond to that.
and then you expect to get him and Aaron, back,
Yeah, yeah.
rolling at 100%.
no, it's not possible.
That is a significant obstacle,
some-
and I don't
some-
think we ever acknowledge.
Some people
that.
have explored the idea of a seasonal brewery, and they've actually tried to implement it. And for reasons like that, it's impossible. It never mind, the employees, but the supply chain, the equipment, and there's too much cadence, and we're kind of we're disregarding the role of the yeast in this. They have their own cadence.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, before we move on too far, Joel, where does income tax and property tax fall into this?
Glad you asked that question.
Why would you ask that question?
$7.5 million was raised in tax revenue on day one of the Cullen-Harrison Act. Now, we're back in 1933. Cullen-Harrison is a partial repeal of Prohibition, allowing for the production of 3.2% beer. $7.5 million, bless you,
Sorry.
goes into the federal coffers on day one. That in 1933, that is an enormous
Yeah.
sum of money.
It's got to be.
You have to
How many
think,
fold? Yeah.
well, what would that look like today,
Yeah.
or whatnot? I don't know the exchange rate.
Yeah.
I'm not that good at math.
I think
Allison's on her
Gary's
phone,
typing it
maybe.
right now.
Gary's on it.
Yeah.
But I mean, $7.5 million. Do you have the number?
The total receipts for the United States in 1933 was $2 billion.
So $7.5 million on one day is
So
a
it's
significant.
0.3% in one day. Yeah.
Did you just do that math in your head that fast?
I don't know if I did or not. I think I may have messed it up. Was I right?
What?
0.3%?
Yeah.
Gosh,
There you go,
I'm the
0.5.
dumbest person on this podcast by far. I'm like number 5 because David's way sharper than I am too. But I mean But that is a huge amount of money
In one day.
And FDR himself, was somebody who enjoyed a drink, and I think that there were certainly selfish motivations for doing this, but the biggest, and when the Cullen-Harrison Act was signed in March of 1933, this was all about revenue. And it was an enormous challenge to reboot breweries after 15 years of either inactivity or different activity. Yogurt, cheese, ice cream. I don't know what. Pabst was making this spreadable cheese. I've seen pictures of it. It looked horrible.
In previous episodes, one of the things we talked about was a consolidation of the beer industry that kind of went through, say, the 70s and 80s. And this was kind of the big drop off. This was the start of
It
that.
was an extinction level.
But then there was also
that's a good way to look at
a
it.
change in beer taste and beer consumption. Another thing we've talked about in the past, how refrigeration technology became popular.
Yep.
And from the start of Prohibition to the end of Prohibition, a lot happened in this country in terms of technology. And you had refrigerated cars that went from, they were there to being pretty much ubiquitous. And what I did, the brief readings I did on this, is that when things started back up, the light lager really took off.
Yeah.
And when you go to a grocery store today, it's all light lagers. Almost every major brand you can think of is a light lager. And this seems like this is kind of the point where that started.
Yes.
It's a split personality. You see that in one cabinet, and the other one's got marshmallow, barrel aged, whatever. But
How much of that was because of the rice and the the rationings from the war? And then once you learned that you could ferment rice,
that's not a bad point.
Well, that went to come until later.
well,
but
that,
in as early as 1941, we're having wheatless days in the United States.
But I think I wrote down this word marketing because I think marketing is a big part of the story.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Respecting the Beer. Make sure to follow the show on your favorite podcast player like Spotify or Apple so you can get the second half of this conversation next week about beer after Prohibition. Respecting the Beer is produced by me, David Kelso, with music by Sarah Lynn Huss. Be sure to join the Facebook group to get social between episodes. And if you really love beer, support the show over on Patreon. You can get episodes a week ahead of time and access to beers brewed exclusively for Patreon members. Links to everything in the show notes. And until next time, please remember to respect the beer.